coming on the air with the new pitch from President Biden to try to lower gas prices. A holiday, a gas tax holiday. But are members of his own party ready to celebrate? Doesn't seem like it. It all plays into this political pressure the president's facing ahead of the midterms. We're going to talk about what it means for you and the chances this gas tax break becomes real. Plus, we're live in Texas, where the lawmaker who represents Uvalde is now suing the state, demanding access to records about the police response to last month's shooting. A look at a frustrated community as local officials are saying, hey, we're not all to blame. And it's not every day the most powerful man in football is over on Capitol Hill, but that's how Roger Goodell spent his Wednesday, answering questions from lawmakers about these new allegations of misconduct inside Washington's football team. We break down that explosive hearing. Plus, the FDA saying Juul's got to go, telling the e-cigarette brand it's going to have to pull products off the shelves. But with the company's popularity declining, is that going to really have an impact on the industry? Plus, in tonight's original, the mysterious death of Julio Ramirez, who some believe was killed because he was gay. You're going to hear from his family, who wants answers. Hey, I'm Hallie, and today President Biden's embracing this new idea to get you some help at the gas pump, the kind of help that his party has long opposed, a gas tax holiday. He's making the ask to Congress in just the last few hours, again blaming the cost of gas on the so-called Putin price hike and calling on oil and gas companies to refine more and not pass those costs on to all of us.
I fully understand that a gas tax holiday alone is not going to fix the problems, but it will provide families some immediate relief, just a little bit of breathing room. I'm doing my part. I want the Congress, the states, and the industry to do their part as well.
Okay, so this is a suspension, the president says, that would last for the next 3 months through September. And look, gas would immediately go down about 18 cents a gallon. 24 cents a gallon is how much would be shaved off the cost of diesel. That would really put a dent into where prices are now, $4.95 on average, a little bit down from last week, but still a lot higher than last year. The president's also calling on state governors to suspend their gas taxes where they live. A couple have already done that. Connecticut was one of the first to do it back on April 1st. But look here at the average price of gas per gallon in that state. Notice how it's pretty similar to what I just showed you for the national average. As the Wall Street Journal is reporting, drivers in Connecticut aren't really noticing. One person they talked with says it's damaging her trust in lawmakers to do anything, saying, in her words, it makes me not want to vote. Kristen Welker's at the White House. And Kristen, even more recently than the president's speech on this gas tax holiday, we heard from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was, I think it is objectively fair to say, less than enthusiastic about this proposal. She simply said, we will see where the consensus is. Okay, we'll see, is what she says. She's one of several Democrats who have criticized for a while the idea of a gas tax holiday. She called it very showbiz at one point. Watch.
I've seen other states do this, where I don't think the data reflects that the consumers benefit.
We're paying for something to give a break to the oil companies. It is not a given that reduction goes to the consumer.
We are not tackling the problem that has to be tackled. We are offering gimmicks.
Okay, so Kristen, why then is the president turning to this idea now?
So, Hallie, I have been talking to White House officials about this issue for months. What are they going to do about inflation? What are they going to do about the soaring price of gas? And this is one of the possible tools in the president's, or more accurately, Congress's toolkit. And the challenge with it is everything that you just laid out, concerns that the gas tax holiday will ultimately not get sent down to consumers, that concern that in the long run it will only drive up prices even higher, that this is a temporary fix, and that it's such a marginal fix around the edges. So those are the concerns with it. The White House has been batting that back and forth for months, trying to figure out what are the other options here. We know that the president has tapped the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's one move that he has. Here's the reality check, Hallie. There's not a whole lot the president can do about the soaring price of gasoline and about inflation at this point. And so he's trying to show that he's doing something, right? He wants to call on Congress to make this move, to pass the gas tax holiday as a show of, we hear you, we understand your pain, we are trying to address this issue. But Hallie, The White House doesn't know if they have the votes. You read that lukewarm statement by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, clearly not an endorsement there. And so it's not clear that this is going to get passed. Now, of course, the July 4th holiday is looming large. That's another reason for the timing of this. The administration wants to get ahead of the fact that a record number of drivers are expected to hit the roads on that key holiday. Symbolically, optically, they believe this helps them. But, of course, the midterms looming large over all of it, Hallie, and so that's a driving force as well.
You talk about the politics of this, Kristen. Let's say it were to pass, right? And I talked with Michigan Senator about this just in the last couple hours. The gas tax, if it were 3 months, for example, that means that come September or October, boy, that gas tax would snap right back in place just in time for the midterms. There's something that caught our team's eye today, a gas station just outside Pittsburgh today, offering a deal, listen to this, $2.38 for gas. That's right, for just 2 hours. But you know who paid for that? The group Americans for Prosperity, libertarian conservative group run by a major Republican donor family. Kristen, it feels like this really showcases how gas prices are front and center for Republicans and in some ways for Democrats right ahead of the midterms.
Absolutely. And Hallie, case in point, you and I have been covering a range of stories throughout the week, including the January 6th committee hearings. What do Republicans want to talk about? What are they tweeting about? What do they want to put the focus on? These high gas prices, soaring inflation. They believe it is a reminder and their best argument that it is time for a change at the top and also in these key races that we're tracking in the midterms. So expect a lot more of that, Hallie.
Kristen Welker, live for us at the White House. Welks, thank you. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you. You too.
Turning now to Republican Senator Ted Cruz just a few hours ago telling NBC News he will not support the bipartisan gun bill worked out in Congress because he says it's the wrong approach. He says it doesn't target criminals. Watch.
The other approach is the approach Washington Democrats pursue over and over again, which is to disarm law-abiding citizens. That doesn't work. It doesn't prevent crime.
That legislation negotiated by Cruz's fellow Texas Senator John Cornyn, who today says he's optimistic about the bill's impact.
One of the things that I think is most important about the bill, this will represent the single largest investment in community-based mental health coverage in American history.
Senate leaders are pushing to hold a vote on the new bipartisan gun package by the end of the week with the goal of sending it to the president's desk by the end of July. It'll then head to the House, where Speaker Nancy Pelosi has already said she'd support it. House Republicans leaders there say they're going to try to convince their members to vote no. To be clear, the legislation could pass the House with only Democratic votes, but it'll probably get some support from some Republicans, too, including Congressman Tony Gonzalez, who represents Uvalde, Texas. That city's still just reeling after the deaths, the murders of 19 little kids, 19 students and 2 teachers at Robb Elementary School. He says he's going to be a yes on this legislation. Joining me now is Scott Wong. So, Scott, we're looking at a vote by the end of the week, according to Senator Schumer, right? Is that at, Wednesday evening Eastern time? Does that seem like a realistic possibility still?
Well, it's a fluid situation, as you know, most things are in the United States Senate. And one senator in particular known for holding things up is Senator Rand Paul. And he tweeted a lengthy diatribe earlier today saying, poking holes in the bill, calling it full of constitutional deficiencies. He wants amendments on this bill. And so this is what's going to be happening in the next 24 hours or so, negotiations with Senator Paul to try to work out an agreement on amendments to try to speed this process along. It looks like they could get there by the end of this week. That still seems realistic. As you pointed out, Pelosi said she's prepared to bring this to the floor by the end of the week as well, before these lawmakers in both the House and the Senate get out of town for that 2-week recess. They really want to get this wrapped up and sent to the president's desk before the 4th of July holiday.
The CBO is out with an estimate that the bill is going to cost about $16 billion. I want to take this in a couple of buckets, Scott. What's in the bill, and then specifically how some Republicans in the Senate are responding to what's in the bill. So take bucket one first, this agreement, for example, on the boyfriend loophole sticking point and some other things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this was a good old-fashioned compromise. Republicans got funding for school security, for mental health resources. Democrats were able to broaden background checks to include juvenile records. That was one of their big priorities. You mentioned the boyfriend loophole, which this bill does close. The big sticking point had been over the definition. And just to take a quick step back, if you're in a marriage or if you share a child with somebody and you commit domestic violence, you're not allowed to purchase a gun. But if you're the boyfriend of somebody and you commit domestic violence, well, that was the loophole, and people were able to purchase guns. So they tried to close that loophole. They settled on a new definition of what those relationships would look like, and what they came up with was, any relationship that is a current, recent, serious relationship of a romantic or intimate nature. They wrestled back and forth over those handful of words and came to that conclusion. They are hoping that this wraps up that loophole and prevents violent crimes in the future between domestic partners.
So take bucket two real quick, Scott, which is Mitch McConnell has sort of blessed the framework of this, saying he's proud to support it, but not all Republicans are on board. So where do you think, what are we hearing from some of these in the GOP who feel like the process was rushed?
It's interesting that, half of the leadership team, McConnell included, Cornyn included, is for this gun measure. Half of the other part of the leadership team is against it. A number of the 2024 prospects, including Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley, a number of folks taking a look at perhaps jumping into that presidential race, are also opposed. On the other side of the House, GOP leadership in the House, Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, are urging their members to vote against this, saying that it will erode Second Amendment rights. Hallie.
Scott Wong, live for us on the Hill. Scott, thank you. To Texas now, where folks in Uvalde, as we mentioned, Uvalde, are now trying to get access to documents, videos, anything that could clear up what a top state official is calling a failure, an abject failure by police during the horrific massacre last month. We're learning today now that the state senator who represents this town, Uvalde, Roland Gutierrez, he's now suing the Texas Department of Public Safety, accusing them of basically only releasing a little bit here and there, all while throwing bombs in the media. Watch.
It is time to pull off this Band-Aid, let this community begin to heal, and try to rebuild credibility with their own local law enforcement, build community policing and the things that they need to do going forward.
That's after another day of hearings in the state capitol with this special Senate committee. Not a lot of new details in the investigation itself, but lawmakers did hear from mental health and gun reform experts on possible solutions and what they still desperately need. Sam Brock is joining us live now from Austin, Texas. Okay, so Sam, let me start with this lawsuit. State Senator Gutierrez says here he's being unlawfully denied access to the records from the Department of Public Safety in Texas. Take us inside more about what he's saying and the response that we're getting.
So I think the best way to frame this, what Roland Gutierrez, Hallie, is saying right now is that the state of Texas has failed the city and community of Uvalde by withholding this information. If we go back to just a few weeks ago, you'll recall that Governor Abbott said the police did an amazingly quick job of getting to where they needed to be and saved countless lives. Well, now we found out yesterday, and certainly over the last several weeks, they were inside that building for 74 minutes before taking out the gunman. 3 minutes after the gunfire started within the school, there were multiple officers with rifles that did not proceed. So all of that proved to be untrue. What Roland Gutierrez is saying right now is, I want to see the documentation, specifically communication between law enforcement officers, what they were saying in the heat of the moment, body camera footage, surveillance footage. The public has a right to see this. And Stephen McCraw, who is the head of Texas DPS, told law enforcement officials, I should say, told state senators yesterday, if you think it's bad right now, wait until you see this body camera footage. Why should we all not also have access to that body camera footage? That really is what's at the very heart of this lawsuit right now.
We also heard from a bunch of mental health experts today, Sam, and what they essentially laid out is that even though the governor says he wants to boost resources, there's been a lot that they don't have right now. That's the truth of the matter. They feel like they don't have the support that they need at this point.
It is hard not to see this as lip service. And look, they did create an entire hearing today largely focused on mental health with some firearm safety attached for good measure. But the focus of it is mental health. Governor Abbott cut more than $200 million for mental health services from Texas's budget within the last year. What we heard today from the Texas Medical Association is that the state of Texas, Hallie, is likely down about 1,000 psychiatrists. We also found out there's a consortium that is trying to provide services for children, students specifically, that need counseling through telemedicine. And that's about 40% of all kids in the state of Texas that right now have access to it. Uvalde is not part of that consortium as of right now.
There's also these broader tensions, and we saw this really explode between the city and the state, right? So local officials and then state officials, including the Uvalde mayor, who, right after we came off the air last night, had this explosive moment accusing the state, basically, Sam, of trying to make local police look bad. Let me play that for folks who missed it.
I'm not covering up for anybody. If you're guilty, we're going to throw it out there. You want to cover up, we're going to throw it out there. There's no more, no more, no more.
It feels like that really speaks to the frustration, like in every single angle, every single part of this.
Oh, it totally speaks to the frustration. He also said, look, there's 8 law enforcement agencies that were involved in this response, not just Uvalde, but one other note to this, Hallie. Pete Arredondo, they did not give him an excused absence last night, and there was applause all throughout the city council because it paves the way potentially for city council to remove Arredondo if he misses 2 more meetings, which is to say people there are fed up and they're angry, both with their own law enforcement and law enforcement across the state of Texas.
Sam Brock, live for us in Austin. Sam, we'll look forward to more of your reporting tonight on Nightly. Appreciate it. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell today testifying in front of a House committee about the Washington football team and whether they can actually provide a safe workplace for employees. You saw him appear virtually today to answer some questions from lawmakers about Dan Snyder's organization. He's the owner, right? Listen to this.
Mr. Snyder is in France, where he has docked his luxury yacht near a resort town. That should tell you just how much respect he has for women in the workplace.
It is clear to me that the workplace in Washington was unprofessional and unacceptable in numerous respects. Bullying, widespread disrespect toward colleagues, use of demeaning language, public embarrassment, and harassment.
Explosive new allegations today by the House Oversight Committee against Snyder. After a months-long investigation, they're accusing him of launching a shadow investigation, they say, to try to discredit allegations against him of misconduct. He also allegedly refused to take action against a coach accused of misconduct and fired female employees who had consensual relationships with team members. And now there's this hint of a subpoena that's coming from the chairwoman of that committee, the woman you just heard from, who says she may very well try to use legal muscle to make sure that Snyder comes before them to answer questions. He's since released a statement, by the way, just today, Snyder, calling today's hearing a politically charged show trial. Ali Vitale is joining us now from Capitol Hill. Okay, let me start, Ali, with what happened today, what we saw in this hearing room, and the fact that here you have the head. You know, Snyder didn't show, but Roger Goodell did.
Yeah, that's a really stunning piece of information that he was coming before the committee virtually, but he was there. And you heard Goodell speak at different moments about the toxic workplace culture that he believes existed within the Washington football team. But he made the point to say that the team that he knows now does not have that same workplace culture. That's something, frankly, that Dan Snyder's legal team and spokesperson said that they were paying close attention to, and they wanted us to pay attention to, because they think that that's important, that over the course of the investigation, since it was investigated and until now, that the club has changed its workplace culture. But I just want to dig in a little bit on what the committee itself said that they found, because this has been the result of a months-long investigation, and you can pull up some of the things that they're alleging in a memo that they put out before the start of the hearing. Some of them include lawyers for Snyder making an 100-page dossier with private emails and texts of people who made credible public allegations. They even said that Snyder and his lawyers offered some former cheerleaders hush money to try to dissuade them from cooperating with the Beth Wilkinson investigation. That's one of the central pieces here. But again, these are allegations being made by the committee, and Snyder himself was nowhere to be found to rebut them.
Even though his spokesperson talked with you, right, Ali?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They issued a statement to me, and they really focused on this being a politically charged hearing. They said that the report that I just read pieces of and that you showed was part of a political hunt, effectively, saying at one point that the committee's decision to release that report and introduce legislation prior to the hearing was proof positive that this was always going to be little more than a politically charged show trial.
What's next in this, Ali? Where does this go from here? Because it sounds like more hearings are likely on the radar in the future, no?
Yeah, more hearings, and the chairwoman is saying that she's going to subpoena Dan Snyder. That would be a really big escalation here, but it would make sense given the fact that they have done months of investigations here. This is far from the first hearing on the issues within the Washington football team, and it seems like they want to continue doing more. There's also the question of these thousands of documents related to the Beth Wilkinson investigation that the committee wants to see. Goodell made a point today to say that they only got oral reports on that investigation. The committee is wondering why there was no written portion of it. Goodell explains that it was to protect the witnesses who chose to comply with the internal investigation. Doesn't seem like the committee is buying that, and it's why they're pressing so hard to get Snyder, among other things.
Hallie Vitale live on the Hill. Hallie, thanks. Appreciate you staying on top of that. The Supreme Court is going to release opinions later on this week for another day. We're waiting for decisions in 13 cases, including the one from Mississippi that could end up seeing Roe versus Wade overturned. Normally, we might have decisions maybe 1 or 2 times a week, but today the court announced it's going to also issue some on Friday, so 2 days from now. We don't know what's going to be released ahead of time, right? But the abortion access case has created, obviously, a major controversy. That leaked draft opinion back in May suggested a majority of justices on the court are ready to overturn that landmark ruling on Roe. It could lead to abortion becoming basically illegal in more than a dozen states almost right away. We're obviously going to stay on top of the Supreme Court. We'll bring you anything in the next couple days. All right, you know it, I know it. It is hot, hot, hot out there. It's summer. It's always hot, but just how hot right now, that's stunning, right? 155 million people. That is so many people. All of those people, probably you, maybe, good chance you, experiencing temperatures into the 90s today. 17 million are going to have highs over 100 degrees in the deep south in this stretch you see on your screen from Texas to Georgia. And these temperatures might soon be more the news, or rather the norm, than the news. You had Chicago hitting a high of 99 degrees. And look at this, so hot yesterday, this road basically buckled because of the heat. That's hot. Now it's hitting down south. That's where we find Kathy Park, who's in northern Florida today. Kathy, what's the expectation for where you are in Jacksonville?
Hey there, Hallie. You said it. It is hot, hot, and very hot here in Jacksonville. Right now, we are hovering in the 90s. However, tomorrow we could be looking at 100 degrees. And if that's the case, it would be the first time in 3 years. And forecasters are saying, look, yeah, it is hot in Florida during this time of year. However, there is a drier air mass that is settling in, and that is why it is pushing the temperatures up. Hallie?
I know you talked with somebody today who gave you kind of a reality check on extreme temperatures, right?
That is exactly right. So we are here on the campus of University of North Florida, and there is a group of researchers, and they were out there this past weekend, one of the hottest days of the year so far, and they were essentially collecting temperatures across the region. And essentially, this will be a baseline. As you know, climate change, it's something that we are monitoring very closely, and so is this team on the campus. And they said this will essentially be a benchmark as we continue to monitor these extreme temperatures. Take a listen.
Scary part is that as climate change continues, you know, what we're experiencing now this summer is going to be considered low, right? As temperatures get hotter and heat waves get more frequent, we're going to look back on this time and think, oh, we had it good back then, right? And it's going to get even worse as the decades progress. That's the really scary thing.
And Hallie, the information that was gathered over the weekend will eventually be released in the next couple of months, but they already have a big takeaway, and that has to do with heat disparity. When you go to wealthier neighborhoods, you'll notice that a lot of these homes are spread out. There is a lot more cover. There's more shade. However, compare that to urban neighborhoods and lower income populations, and the homes are built closely together, and that traps the heat. And as we deal with these extreme heat waves, that's going to be a public health catastrophe, potentially a crisis, and that's why this study is so critical, and that's why they're following the numbers so closely. Hallie.
Kathy Park live for us in Jacksonville. Stay cool, Kathy. Really appreciate you being out there in the elements for us. To Afghanistan now, where rescue teams are working hard as we speak after that awful 5.9 magnitude earthquake hit the country's east. At least 1,000 people have been killed. 1,500 more are believed to have been hurt. And the numbers are already shocking, right? Even with officials warning they could go up. This happened in the mountains, a pretty remote area, so people who live here are already especially vulnerable to landslides. There's not a lot of easy access to like cell phones or comms. There's wind, there's a ton of rain right now that makes it hard for helicopters to get in, even just to look at the damage, much less rescue people who survived. It's a huge test also for the country's Taliban-run government. Right now, they're asking for help, but after the U.S. pulled out of the country last year, so did a lot of international organizations over security concerns and the Taliban's multiple violations of human rights. Matt Bradley joins us now. And Matt, let me start with what's happening on the ground, because Afghanistan obviously has had earthquakes. They have a history of it, but this is the deadliest in at least 20 years. What else do we know about what's happening as we speak right now?
I mean, right now there's a massive search and rescue operation that's been going on in the eastern part of the country. They're trying to reach areas that really are so remote that, they're not necessarily accessible by car. They're accessible by helicopter, and that's where the Taliban and other government authorities come in. They are helping to bring rescue workers to these locations in helicopters and then to ferry the wounded back. But the situation right now, you really just said it, Hallie. There's a lot of landslides. A lot of these homes, and I spoke with some rescue workers who were there, they said that, a lot of these homes were so shoddily built that 5.9, and that's what the U.S. Geological Survey has said, a 5.9 Richter scale earthquake. It has yielded this enormous number of casualties, and you wouldn't see that in the States with a 5.9 earthquake, or even here in London if they had earthquakes here. So the question is, how is this country going to recover, considering how remote, how isolated this region is? Well, it's going to take a lot of work for a country that doesn't have a lot of money and a lot of resources to spare. Hallie?
Matt, the international assistance picture is rather complicated, no, because of the Taliban leading this government, essentially, this country?
Yeah, I mean, that's the real issue. And I think it's going to be really interesting to look at that, Hallie, as we go forward, because, of course, a lot of the West and a lot of these aid organizations and a lot of Western governments backed away after the U.S. was essentially ousted from Afghanistan after 20 years of an occupation that never really took hold. And now these countries, these Western countries, they're kind of wondering what the Taliban is up to, what they're going to be doing. They don't want to empower them, but this is really forcing everybody's hands because of the magnitude of this disaster. As you mentioned, the numbers are staggering. And so when you talk about whether or not these international organizations are going to be participating, whether they're going to be cooperating with the only authority on the ground, which is the Taliban, I mean, it would make them look cold-hearted and ignorant to not help out. But at the same time, they don't want to empower a group that has been at war with the West in the better part of the last 30 years. So, I mean, this really is putting everybody in a very uncomfortable position and will likely force people to, or force organizations and nations and the Taliban to come to some sort of agreement to spare the people of Afghanistan. Hallie?
Just a horrific scene and situation there. Matt Bradley, thank you so much. Appreciate your reporting on that. Today, a handful of organizations representing women, people of color, and LGBTQ voters are asking President Biden to get some kind of a deal to make sure that WNBA superstar Brittney Griner is released from Russian detention, according to a letter obtained by the New York Times. It says that while these folks are appreciative of what the administration's done so far, they say, we now urge you to make a deal to get Brittney back home to America immediately. Today, Griner was named an honorary starter at the WNBA All-Star Game, with the league saying it's only fitting and that they'll keep working on her safe return to the U.S. Griner, remember, has been held in Russia since really February, March, after being accused by Russian officials of having cannabis oil in her luggage. Still to come here on the show, hundreds of cars lining up as Yellowstone partially reopens to people after some of the worst flooding it's ever seen. And the parents of Gabby Petito say her killer's parents knew he did it and hid it from police. Now they're going to court to try to prove it. We've got that coming up. The FDA getting ready to crack down on one of the most popular e-cigarette brands, set to tell the makers of Juul to take its e-cigarettes off store shelves in this country after a 2-year review of all U.S. vaping products. That's according to a report by the Wall Street Journal, citing people familiar with the matter. We reached out to the FDA, and they told us they could not provide any information right now. Juul could not be immediately reached for comment, but it's not the first time they've been in the national spotlight, remember. The company was at the top of the e-cig market back in 2018, but since then, they've stopped selling some popular flavors, they deleted some social media accounts, and they've pulled advertising in the U.S. after being blamed for the rise in e-cigarette use among teens. The CDC and FDA found that more than 2 million high school and middle school students vaped in 2021, with 85% saying they used flavored products. Joining me now is Dr. Kavita Patel. So, Dr. Patel, one thing that I think people have heard, like out in the ether, is that vaping is safer than cigarettes. Is that not true? Talk to us about the impact of e-cigarettes, vaping on people's health.
Yeah, Hallie, it's simply not true. And it's not just that it's not true for children and adolescents. You cited the statistics that are quite disturbing about how many teens or high school students are using the products. But it's not safe for adults. And in fact, Juul in particular reportedly had over 20 times the level of nicotine that you would find in traditional cigarettes. So that is absolutely the opposite of what we want. And just a reminder, e-cigarettes, what is it? It's really a device that helps to heat a liquid that can contain nicotine. So most of these products do have nicotine, which is very much at the heart of things that are linked to cancer, and especially with vaping products, linked to something called vaping-associated lung injury. And Hallie, that's serious, something that we're seeing in children who are getting a hold of these products because they're marketed to them.
We're talking about Juul here, Dr. Patel, but it's not even the most popular brand of e-cigarettes among young people, right? It's actually number 4. So how big of an effect could this actually have on the industry overall if you're looking at this possible move?
Look, I don't think it's any secret that any responsible public health advocate, a doctor such as myself, I do not like where e-cigarettes have gone, no matter what brand or product it is. So I would love to see the FDA get tougher. It shouldn't just be that, OK, your marketing practices are OK for adults, you know, that's good enough. So I do think that having a strong signal against Juul, honestly, the FDA is catching up. The market is responding. Juul has gone down in its popularity, but not eliminated. And who knows, Hallie, unless the FDA puts a crack on all of these erroneous practices, we'll just have another one. We'll play whack-a-mole with these cigarettes. That's what we're seeing already. We need to do something that puts an end to it. But it is helpful to put a strong message out that says, listen, no more, not tolerated.
But so given that, what do you say to parents about how they should talk with their kids on vaping? Especially kids that are like in their teenage years, right? High school, maybe have a driver's license.
Hallie, I'm going to tell you something disturbing. I've got a 7-year-old son. I know you've got kids. I have actually sat down with my son. He has seen, first of all, I think the most honest thing you can do is that if you are a smoker or there's someone in the household that's a smoker, be honest. Kids are smart no matter what age. And the first thing you can do is to help stop smoking. Stopping yourself or anybody in the household can be an incredible example. That's step number 1. Step number 2, the CDC and other nonprofits have great pieces of advice that can appeal to teenagers. The most common factor cited in why teens pick up e-cigarettes, a friend told them to. So having the conversation not just with your children, but with their social network, which in this era, Hallie, is electronic, but having that direct conversation and saying it's not just e-cigarettes, it's all products. It's not just cigarettes, it's all products. And then having examples of how they're getting marketed. Here's the flavors. Here's what your friends might tell you. And just being real and honest about it. But it can't start too early. So I think it's worth parents taking time to see what's happening.
Dr. Kavita Patel, good to have you on. Thank you for your perspective, as always. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Katie Britt has won the Republican nomination for Senate in Alabama. She beat Congressman Mo Brooks in this primary runoff we told you about. People were voting yesterday. At first, remember, former President Donald Trump had endorsed Brooks, but then he took it back. He ended up backing Britt. Now she's going to face Democrat Will Boyd in November. Number 2, Louisiana's Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards has signed a bill that criminalizes abortion in his state with no exceptions for rape or incest if the Supreme Court does overturn Roe versus Wade. Governor Edwards says while he believes there should be those exceptions, his veto would not have made any difference. Number 3, Andrew Gillum, the former Tallahassee mayor and one-time Democratic nominee for governor in Florida, indicted today on federal charges. Gillum charged with things like wire fraud and making false statements. His mentor was also charged, but Gillum denies any wrongdoing, says he's innocent. Number 4, Gabby Petito's parents have filed a lawsuit against Brian Laundrie's parents, claiming they knew their son killed Gabby but refused to do anything about it. The lawsuit also accuses Laundrie's parents of keeping their son's location secret. The coroner concluded Laundrie strangled Petito when the couple was on a cross-country road trip last year. Petito's parents hoping their lawsuit goes to a trial. Number 5, researchers at the University of Miami, well, they've got some interesting findings on sharks. They thought that sharks would be avoiding places that are loud and lit up. But it turns out, scientists say, sharks are spending more time closer to coastlines where there's a lot of people. They might be attracted to places where food is more easily accessible. Okay, well, I hope you're not going on vacation next week. Researchers do say that the risk of shark attacks is still low. We have to say that. It is still a very low risk. Still to come. The January 6th Select Committee is hitting pause on its hearings after tomorrow. Why, they say? Because of a whole bunch of new evidence now coming to light. We'll talk more about it next. Some news from the January 6th Select Committee on their hearing schedule, because tomorrow, yes, they're still going to talk about this pressure campaign on the DOJ. But the chair of the committee says the next hearing then, after that, isn't going to be until sometime in July. Why? Because of new evidence and more witnesses that have come forward.
They have looked at the body of work that we need to get done, and we've taken in some additional information that's going to require additional work. So other than present hearings that have not been the quality of the hearings in the past, we made a decision to just move them to sometime in July.
And speaking of new evidence, documentary filmmaker Alex Holder, who is set to be deposed by the committee tomorrow to answer some questions, has turned over hours of his footage and interviews to the Select Committee, including apparently an interview with Ivanka Trump from December of 2020, where she says her father should, quote, continue to fight until every legal remedy is exhausted, because, she says, people were questioning the sanctity of our elections. It's a very different tone from what she said to the committee in her deposition then. Joining me now is Hallie Rafa. So, Hallie, let's talk scheduling, right? Because this is interesting here, not just because we're political nerds who are like in the weeds of when these hearings are going to happen, but because it says something about the information the committee is gathering. Next hearing is tomorrow. After that, Benny Thompson says it's going to be at least 2 weeks for the next hearing, right? That is strategically important to them because they're getting this new information, but it also holds potentially some political risks.
That's right, Hallie. There are really two arguments to this, one could argue. So the committee is really facing two sort of paths. They could really run the risk of boring the American public, potentially, incurring some Trump fatigue, right? Having all of this information become digestible and understood by the American public, as well as the Justice Department that we know the committee is trying to lay out a case towards. But then you have the other argument that really Chairman Benny Thompson lays out before he gavels out of every hearing. He really lays a case and says, if there are any people who are inspired by the testimony that you heard today, please come forward and give us some tips or evidence, any sort of new information. And that's what we're really seeing play out now, with Benny Thompson saying that these last two hearings will not take place at the end of this month, but will be pushed back to next month. And that's because we're learning so much more about the evidence that the committee is still learning and still gathering as these hearings go on. We know that they've gotten that tranche of emails between Ginny Thomas and former Trump lawyer John Eastman, who we heard so much about in the last hearing. We heard a not-so-veiled case by the committee's top Republican, Liz Cheney, for former White House lawyer Pat Cipollone to come and testify publicly after we know he spoke with the committee sort of informally a couple months ago. And as you mentioned at the top there, now they're hearing about this new footage about Ivanka Trump, and the New York Times is reporting the former president himself, former VP Mike Pence, as well as other family members that the committee didn't know existed before. So they really have to decide whether to continue presenting this case as it comes to fruition, or to take a step back, hold, and wait until this case is really airtight and ready to be presented in full to the American people. Hallie.
There's also, the Ivanka Trump factor here. I want to play a little bit of what we saw already in the deposition from her to the January 6th committee that they then played publicly in one of the earlier hearings after the Attorney General at the time had said there was no voter fraud, no widespread voter fraud in 2020. Here's what Ivanka Trump said to the Select Committee. Watch.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
Okay, so that's Ivanka Trump saying she accepted Barr's assessment of no widespread election fraud. But now there's this documentary and video that is apparently saying that she said something very different, that her father, she felt, needed to fight. Help us understand how to square that discrepancy, or what you're hearing from committee sources about that.
Yeah, and remember, Ivanka Trump was under oath when she gave that pre-recorded testimony before the committee. So there are a couple questions that this raises. You know, does this sow doubt into other pre-recorded testimonies that the committee has presented that became some of the strongest evidence that the committee has presented to the American people and the DOJ, using Trump's own family members, members of his inner circle, Republicans themselves, to really lay out their case for why they think Trump is culpable for what happened on January 6th. It also begs the question of what else can we expect from, as you mentioned, family members that were also included in this footage. What more does Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner know? What did he say in these clips? So there's a big question remaining whether this sows doubt into the testimony that we've already heard, and how the committee handles this going forward. Will there be any sort of repercussions if the committee really lays out evidence for this discrepancy, this difference in what Ivanka is saying in these clips from the New York Times documentarian and what she said in this pre-recorded testimony with the committee, Hallie?
Ali Rafa, thank you. You can catch live coverage, by the way, of tomorrow's hearing at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on NBC News. Now, I will see you then. Be in New York for that. Going to be a busy day. Busy day here on the show, too, because still to come, one of the biggest soccer stars in the world talking with me about equality in sports. What Megan Rapinoe has to say about transgender kids who want to play on the team they identify with. We've got her emotional response. It's part of our conversation coming up. Plus, The Ohio State University makes it official, trademarking the in its name. What that means for the school, besides maybe more eye rolls from Michigan fans. That's coming up. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Midwest Bureau, Brooklyn Center, Minnesota will pay $3.25 million to the family of Daunte Wright in a wrongful death settlement. You may remember Wright was the 20-year-old black man who was shot and killed by a white police officer during a traffic stop last year. The settlement also requires the city to make changes to how it handles traffic stops and other police reforms. From our West Coast Bureau, check it out, tourists lining up. Very long line to get back into Yellowstone National Park today. The park is partially opened back up after major flooding caused damage to homes and roads. Officials say the northern part of the park, including a lot of the park's famous wildlife viewing areas, will stay closed at least for another few weeks. Also from our Midwest Bureau, Ohio State University apparently got a trademark on one of the most common used words. It is the word, literally T-H-E, the word. The school now has permission to use "the" on branded products. The spokesperson for the university says "the" has been a rallying cry in the Ohio State community for years. If you watch football, right, you know how they always introduce themselves? The Ohio State University. It's like a thing, according to the Wall Street Journal. So take a look. You're looking at the First Lady today. You're about to see her honoring the 50th anniversary of Title IX being signed into law, that landmark piece of legislation that banned discrimination against women and girls in schools.
Our schools have created opportunities for women to learn and safe spaces that help them fight back against discrimination and sexual violence. These things no longer feel revolutionary. We take them for granted because they are our right.
But many advocates now say the Title IX fight is not over, right? It is not settled, far from it, with the rights of transgender girls and women in the spotlight. Girls like Kieran Clausen in Indiana, who's 9 years old. She transitioned when she was 3. A new law in Indiana would ban her from girls' sports starting in middle school. But Kieran tells me, for a story you'll see tomorrow, that she just wants to play sports and have fun with her friends.
And
I asked soccer superstar Megan Rapinoe, who's been advocating for inclusion in girls' sports, about that. Here's what she told me about Kieran and about sports more broadly. Watch.
She just wants to play with her friends. What's your message to her?
I mean, we're with you, and it's like emotional to think about it. I mean, this kid's, you know, so young. She just literally wants to play with her friends. Like, we're with you. You have a lot of support. I know some of the most evil voices are the loudest, but we're screaming too, we're fighting for you too, and just hang in there. God forbid a trans person excel in sports. I would rather have that than have kids committing suicide at 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 15 years old because they can't even live with themselves because all they've ever been told about themselves is that they're gross, they're horrible, it's unfair, it's on this. So I think I hate it that sports is being used in this way. Sports is an amazing vehicle for so many people. And it's been an amazing vehicle for me, but it isn't the most important thing. It's not all about elite sports. And coming from someone who's elite, I would literally give up everything that I've ever achieved for not one of these kids to feel what they're feeling.
We also talk with some student athletes who say this is about fairness, arguing their own Title IX rights have been violated by letting trans girls compete against them. You're going to hear more about all of it with an in-depth look tomorrow morning over on the Today Show. Coming up, we speak with the family of Julio Ramirez, a social worker whose mysterious death in the back of a taxi has sparked calls for justice in the LGBTQ plus community. His family, they want answers. We've got that after the break. So tonight's Original Now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. And this month is Pride Month, as you probably know. Across the U.S., people recognizing and honoring the impact of the LGBTQ plus community. It's also a month to remember those who've been lost to HIV, AIDS, and hate crimes. The Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, GLAAD, releasing today a new poll showing a majority of Gen Z LGBTQ people worry more about their personal safety now, this year, 2022, than in the past 2 years. Which brings us to the story of Julio Ramirez. Earlier this month, hundreds of people gathered in Times Square, holding signs and speaking up to call attention to the mysterious death of Ramirez, a social worker who was found dead in a taxi more than a month ago after a night out. As Jay Valle reports, many wonder if his death could be linked to a hate crime, while his family just wants answers.
It has been nearly 9 weeks since the mysterious disappearance and death of Julio Ramirez, who was last seen leaving this popular Manhattan gay bar. Family and friends are now left with more questions than answers and are demanding justice for Julio. NYPD investigators say they have video surveillance of Julio Ramirez leaving the bar with 3 unidentified men, but the video has not been shown to the family or the public. According to police, Julio was found unresponsive in the back of a cab hours after leaving the bar. Julio's father says, "We want to see if anyone knows this person. Has anyone seen them? So they can contact the police or relatives to give information. What did those people do? Who are these people?" A police source told NBC News the initial cause of death was listed as a possible drug overdose. Julio's official cause and manner of death are pending further study, according to the medical examiner who told NBC News in an email that this could take at least a few weeks. Julio's family is left wondering who were the men who police say entered the taxi with Julio, and who is responsible for draining what they claim to be nearly $20,000 from his bank accounts in the days following his death.
We need to know what happened. We were told that a secondary toxicology would come up with more results, which would have been 6 to 8 weeks from Julio's death.
The medical examiner said Julio was initially identified as John Doe. The family says neither his wallet nor phone were with him when he died. He says, "I got a call from a medical examiner at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. They asked for me and they told me, 'Your son is dead,' just like that." Julio had just moved to New York City last year after obtaining a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees from the University at Buffalo. He had been living and working in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood, where he was a bilingual mental health counselor. He was very lovable and smart. He completed 2 master's degrees at the same time. His goal was always to prepare, study, and what can be more? Julio's mom says, "He was very sweet, a great person. He was everything to me." On June 8th, friends and community members gathered for a candlelight vigil and a moment of silence in memory of Ramirez.
The turnout was incredible. The amount of support, it really showed me and showed his family that he was cared for, that his story touched a lot of people. And I think a lot of people there realized that they could have been Julio.
After nearly 9 weeks, the family demands answers from the police. NBC News reached out to the NYPD Deputy Commissioner's Office of Public Information regarding the surveillance video. Their response, at this time, there is nothing further. She says, I would like justice to be served and also for the medical examiner to give us an answer.
Jay is joining us now. And Jay, you know, it is heartbreaking, I think, to watch his family there and talking with them. Did you get the sense, it seems like it, that they think more could be done, that this investigation could actually go further?
Absolutely. You know, one thing that I sensed stepping into their home was the sense of devastation and heartbreak. And it yesterday actually marked 2 months since Julio's death, and there has not been an official autopsy report or official cause of death. And what's interesting about this is the surveillance that has not been shown to the public or the family. And this has surely impacted the community, the LGBTQ plus community, both nationally and locally. As you saw there, the candlelight vigil drew hundreds that marched to Times Square chanting justice for Julio. And that's ultimately what community, friends, and family want at this point.
Jay Valle, I'm glad to see you on. Thank you for being with us and for bringing us this important story. I appreciate it. That does it for us this hour. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. And again, we'll see you for that special coverage of the January 6th Select Committee hearing. I'll see you there. More coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.